China. Of course, prominent businessman, as I said, Andrew Forrest, allegedly blindsided Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt yesterday, inviting China's Consul General for Victoria to speak at their joint press conference in Melbourne. And that building they're in is the Commonwealth Parliamentary Offices, and it sort of stuck in my craw last night to see imagery of all that Chinese propaganda coming out of the bloke's mouth and all the parliamentary books from Australia sitting behind him and our flag and many other things. Now, all of this follows a lot of tension between China and Australia as the government pursues an independent inquiry into the origins of this virus and a real push on the role of the World Health Organisation. I'm joined now by Senator Matt Canavan in Rockhampton and Chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, Federal MP Andrew Hastie in Perth. Gentlemen, I want you on tonight because I think we have to have a fair income conversation about China. I thought yesterday it was, cock up, not conspiracy, in the appearance of the Consul General at the press conference. Today it's revealed in the Australian Andrew Hastie that it was an ambush, it was pre-planned, it was designed to put up a Chinese view of the world. I was also surprised very much to hear that Forrest will be reimbursed hundreds of millions of dollars, we're told, for these medical equipment supplies bought out of China. Let's start the ambush. How did that make you feel today?
Well, good evening, Peter. I think yesterday was a media stunt that did not advance our national interests, nor did it advance the cause of the Commonwealth Government. And when you consider it in the context of the week, the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party, have had something of a victory in terms of informational warfare. On Monday, the ambassador threatened Australia with economic sanctions. On Tuesday, they reported the meeting or the contents of the meeting with the head of DFAT, Miss Adamson, the head of DFAT, running a disinformation campaign. And then yesterday, they struck gold by being able to gate crash a press conference with the health minister. So it demonstrates the size of their political warfare arsenal, and they're chalking up some wins. So from a national interest perspective, I was rather upset as a member of the backbench serving in government ranks.
What did you make of it, Matt Canavan?
Well, Peter, good to be here, and I agree with a lot of what Andrew just said. I do actually think there is some silver lining here, though, from yesterday's stunt. In some respects, it has helped highlight and clarify a choice that is before us as a country and a nation. And I actually think, like the battle we're in at the moment, it is sunlight here in this debate, which is the best disinfectant. If we just put this question as simply and clearly as possible, it almost answers itself. Because what Twiggy has been arguing this week, and I say Twiggy's done remarkable things, a great Australian businessman, but the position he's had this week is that we should change our position on our insistence to have an independent, transparent inquiry as soon as possible into this pandemic. His view has been we should delay it until after the US presidential election. We should change our position on an important foreign policy matter because of potentially the economic costs of sticking to the policy that we have set as the best course of action. Now, I think as soon as you express that question, that somehow we should change our own nation's foreign policy because potentially the economic costs of doing otherwise are too high, well, we've got a problem. We have a big problem. And if that is the case, if what Andrew was saying is right and other business leaders are saying is right, we better start getting ourselves out of this dependence and out of this dependent relationship as soon as possible, because I sure as hell don't want to trade off our nation's freedom, our nation's sovereignty, just to do some trade with another country. That is not the deal, and it's not acceptable.
And Matt Canavan, I'll just stay with you. You're a minister, former minister, so you understand all the procurement rules. You've had plenty of exposure in the finance department. I want to go to Andrew with some other intelligence-related things, but I looked at the idea that a businessman of his own volition or at the request of the government does some deal with Chinese suppliers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It doesn't seem to have much transparency and probity for my mind, and that the taxpayer in the end, after being intimated it was philanthropy, has to repay this money. Now, Where are the usual rules that you'd have on an Oz tender? Why isn't the government itself securing this information, these goods, directly? Why are we going through a mining middleman?
Well, look, Peter, I'm going to have to plead a bit of ignorance there. You're absolutely right about the probity that is expected on our procurement rules. I don't have the information about this particular arrangement, apart to say that absolutely all of those things should be adhered to, and I think the nature of this transaction and the publicity around it now requires that we make sure that there is proper parliamentary scrutiny of those arrangements, and I'm sure there will be when we get back to Canberra and do this. But what all of this has highlighted, this pandemic has highlighted, is that we must, as a globe, I think, build more resilient supply chains. And that has been something that has been a question before, I think, the globe before this pandemic, but the pandemic has highlighted it. And we perhaps have a unique opportunity right now to cooperate with other countries. And I recognise it's not something businesses can only do alone. There should be a cooperative approach from governments around the world to build resilient supply chains in steel, to build resilient supply chains in rare earths, to build resilient supply chains in all essential commodities, so that we're not dependent on one country and we have a robust trading environment that supports peaceful and respectful relationships between countries.
Andrew Hastie, and I do not make this reference in relation to Twiggy Forrest, but there's been a lot of commercial players out there running lines in this China debate out of COVID-19 that would have the appearance of being more supportive of the Chinese position than perhaps the Australian position, particularly the position that we have this immediate and urgent inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. It's not so long ago that the Parliament passed laws in relation to agents of foreign influence. Are there people in our commercial businesses and elsewhere that should be investigated? Are we looking enough at the dollar-driven commercial sector for their position on China, and not just more broadly, as we have in the past, looked at former politicians and others out of the new legislation?
Well, the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme is an important part of our legislative architecture to bring sunlight into these spaces. Certainly there are business leaders who more or less parrot the party lines from the Chinese government. They're across Australian society, and now they don't necessarily have to register if they're not acting on behalf of another government. It's only for those who are in a direct relationship with a foreign government. So look, if people are concerned about these things, then they should register out of caution, I think. The scheme is designed to just bring more transparency to our public square and our commercial sector. But just picking up on what Matt said about the cost to our economic relationship, no one here is against trade. We're not against Australian prosperity. We want to see our country grow in prosperity. But certainly when we enter into trade deals, we don't also throw into the bargain our freedom of conscience, our freedom of speech and our sovereignty. And I want to make that very clear, because as a Member of Parliament, Matt's a member of the Australian Senate, we're elected to represent the interests of the Australian people, not commercial interests, but the interest of those people who have elected us. And so we speak freely about our values, about issues relating to our geopolitical situation, and of course minorities who can't speak up for themselves, which is why I and others in the Parliament have raised the issue of the Uyghurs and persecuted Christians in China, because it is an important thing. And I know Mr. Forrest has been a big champion of slavery over the years, and this is something that we can all work together on to remedy.